What happens when one of the most outspoken pop stars of this generation walks onto one of daytime television's most unfiltered debate tables, expecting a candid conversation, but instead finds herself in a moment that quickly spirals into one of the most uncomfortable live exchanges viewers have seen in years? Make sure to subscribe to Talk Show Fallout and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The audience is already clapping as Miley Cyrus walks out onto the set of The View. She smiles, waves, and gives a quick hug to each of the hosts. There's a natural warmth at first, nothing unusual. You can feel that familiar daytime TV energy. The hosts are smiling, the audience is engaged, and everything feels like it's going to be another smooth celebrity interview. "Hi, thank you for having me," Miley says, settling into her seat. "Of course," Whoopi Goldberg responds, nodding with a polite smile. "We're happy you're here." There's some light laughter, a few easy questions to start: music, recent projects, and Miley's evolving public image. The tone is casual, even friendly. One of the co-hosts leans in. "You've been very open lately," she says. "About your growth, your past, your changes. Do you feel like people finally understand you?" Miley nods. "I think people are starting to listen instead of just reacting. And that's all I've ever wanted." The audience gives a soft round of applause. It's a safe moment, a comfortable moment. But then the shift begins. Whoopi leans forward slightly. Her tone changes, not aggressive but more direct. "But Miley," she says, pausing just enough to draw attention, "some people would say you've benefited from reinvention without really taking accountability for some of the things you've said or done in the past." There's a slight murmur from the audience. Not loud, but noticeable. Miley's smile tightens just a little. "What do you mean exactly?" Whoopi keeps her gaze steady. "I mean, there were moments where you leaned into certain cultures, certain aesthetics, and then stepped away from them when it no longer served you. And people noticed that." The table goes quiet. One of the co-hosts shifts in her seat. Another glances at Miley, almost as if anticipating the response. Miley exhales softly. "I mean, I've addressed that before. I've talked about how I was learning, how I was growing. I don't think anyone gets everything right in their early 20s. "Sure," Whoopi replies, "but growth doesn't erase impact." The audience reacts again, this time louder. A mix of sounds and scattered applause. Miley nods slowly, but there's a visible change in her posture now. She sits up straighter. "And I've never said it does," she responds. "But I also think it's important to allow people space to evolve without holding them to a version of themselves they no longer are." Another host jumps in, trying to ease the tension slightly. "And you've clearly evolved. I mean, your music, your message, it's different now." "Right," Miley says, turning briefly toward her, grateful for the shift. "Exactly. But Whoopi isn't letting it go. But the question is," she continues, "do you think you've done enough to acknowledge the people who felt used in that process?" There's a noticeable pause. The audience quiets down completely now. Miley looks directly at Whoopi. "I don't think it's fair to say I used anyone," she says, her tone still calm but firmer. "I think I was part of a culture that I was influenced by, just like everyone is influenced by different things." Whoopi tilts her head slightly. Influence and appropriation aren't always the same thing. A few audience members clap at that. Others stay silent. Miley's expression shifts again, this time a little more defensive. "Okay, but where do we draw that line?" she asks. "Because if we're going to start labeling every artist who's ever been inspired by something outside of themselves as appropriating, then we're having a completely different conversation." One of the co-hosts raises her hand slightly, trying to mediate. "I think what Whoopi's getting at is more about acknowledgement. And I have acknowledged it." Miley cuts in, not loudly but clearly. Multiple times. The interruption lands. There's a ripple through the audience. Whoopi leans back slightly, crossing her arms, not aggressively, but in a way that signals she's listening closely now. "Then why do you think people are still bringing it up?" she asks. Miley pauses. For a second, it looks like she's choosing her words carefully. The tension is building, not explosive yet, but definitely no longer casual. "Because people don't always want resolution," Miley says. "Sometimes they want to hold on to a narrative." There's an immediate reaction, some applause, some murmurs, a few surprised looks from the panel. Whoopi raises her eyebrows. "So you think it's about them, not you?" "I think it's about both," Miley replies. "But I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I haven't done the work just because it's not enough for everyone." Now the energy in the room has completely shifted. This is no longer a light interview. One of the co-hosts tries again to step in. Let's talk about your new music, because I think it actually reflects some of this growth. But the moment doesn't quite reset. Whoopi looks at Miley again, her tone still measured but undeniably pointed. Growth is important, but so is listening. And sometimes listening means sitting with discomfort longer than you'd like. Miley nods, but this time there's a visible edge. I've sat with discomfort my entire career, she says. Publicly. Constantly. So I don't think anyone gets to tell me I haven't done that. The audience reacts louder now. There's clear division, some cheering, some hesitant. The other hosts glance at each other. This is turning into something bigger than expected. And as the cameras keep rolling, you can feel it. This conversation is just getting started. The room doesn't reset after that last exchange. It lingers. You can feel it in the silence that follows, the kind that doesn't usually happen on The View unless something real is unfolding. The audience is quieter now, more attentive. Even the co-hosts are sitting a little differently, less relaxed, more alert. Whoopi Goldberg leans forward again, her voice still calm but carrying more weight now. No one's saying you haven't experienced discomfort, she says. But discomfort isn't the same as accountability. There's a soft ooh from somewhere in the audience. Miley Cyrus doesn't immediately respond this time. She presses her lips together briefly, nodding once like she's acknowledging the point, but not necessarily agreeing with it. Okay, Miley says slowly. Then let's define accountability. Because I think people use that word differently depending on what they want from the situation. One of the co-hosts jumps in quickly, sensing the tension tightening again. That's actually a fair point, because for some people, accountability means an apology, and for others it means changed behavior. Exactly, Miley says, turning slightly toward her. And I've done both. Whoopi doesn't interrupt this time, but she doesn't back off either. But do you think the apology reached the people it needed to reach? She asks. Miley exhales, a little sharper now. I can't control how people receive something. I can only control what I put out. The audience reacts again, some applause, some murmurs of agreement. Another host leans in, trying to soften the edge. I think what people struggle with sometimes is they see celebrities evolve, but they don't always feel included in that process. So there's a disconnect. Miley nods, but her expression stays serious. I understand that. But I also think there's this expectation that public figures have to continuously prove their growth over and over again. And at some point, it becomes less about growth and more about performance. That line lands hard. There's a louder reaction from the audience now, some clapping, a few people saying that's true, while others remain quiet. Whoopi tilts her head slightly, studying Miley. So you think people asking for accountability is a performance? She asks. No, Miley says quickly, shaking her head. I think sometimes the demand for it becomes performative. Not always, but sometimes. The distinction is subtle, but it doesn't diffuse the tension. One of the co-hosts raises her hand slightly, trying to redirect. Let me ask you this, because you've had one of the most public transformations in entertainment. Do you ever feel like the public doesn't allow you to move on? Miley lets out a small, almost ironic laugh. All the time. The audience chuckles lightly with her, but it's a nervous kind of laughter. I mean, imagine growing up in front of millions of people, she continues. Every phase, every mistake, every experiment, it's all documented, replayed, analyzed. And then years later, you're still being asked to answer for a version of yourself that you've already outgrown. Whoopi responds almost immediately, but those versions still affected real people. And just like that, the tension spikes again. Miley turns back to her, more directly now. And I've never denied that. Then why does it sound like you're frustrated when people bring it up? Whoopi asks. Because it's not a conversation anymore, Miley replies. It's a loop. There's a noticeable pause after that. The audience is fully locked in now. No side chatter, no movement, just attention. A loop how? One of the co-hosts asks carefully. A loop where no matter what I say or do, Miley explains, it gets filtered through something I've already addressed. So it's like, what's the end goal? What does resolution actually look like? That question hangs in the air. For a moment, no one answers. Then Whoopi speaks again, a little slower this time. Resolution looks like people feeling heard, she says. Miley nods. And I hear that. I really do. But I also think there has to be space for people to accept that growth has happened. A few audience members clap at that, louder than before. One of the co-hosts tries again to bridge the gap. It sounds like both things can exist at the same time. People can still feel hurt, and you can still have grown. Exactly, Miley says quickly. But Whoopi adds, and sometimes the hurt lasts longer than the growth. That line hits. There's a stronger reaction now, some applause, a few audible yes. Miley leans back slightly, crossing her legs, her body language shifting again. She's no longer just responding, she's holding her ground. But how long is someone supposed to carry that? She asks. Because if we're talking about years later, at what point does it stop being about accountability and start being about punishment? That question gets a big reaction. Loud applause from part of the audience, mixed with a few scattered gasps. One of the co-hosts looks toward Whoopi, then back at Miley. That's a strong question. Whoopi doesn't look away. It's not about punishment, she says. It's about impact. And impact doesn't have an expiration date? Miley pushes. No, Whoopi answers firmly. It doesn't. The room tightens again. You can feel the divide now, not just at the table, but in the audience too. Miley nods slowly, but there's a visible frustration building. Okay, she says. Then by that logic, no one ever moves forward. Ever. That's not what I said, Whoopi replies. But it's what it implies, Miley counters. There's a noticeable shift in tone now. The back and forth is quicker, sharper. The interruptions are starting to overlap. One of the co-hosts quickly steps in. Let's just hold on, because I think this is actually a really important conversation, but we don't want to talk over each other. The audience claps lightly, almost in relief. Miley takes a breath, nodding. I'm not trying to dismiss anyone's feelings, she says, her voice steady but more intense now. I'm just saying there has to be a point where growth is recognized. Otherwise, what's the incentive to grow? Whoopi responds just as quickly. The incentive to grow should be internal, not based on whether or not people forgive you. That lands hard. There's a mix of reactions again, some applause, some silence. Miley pauses, looking at her for a moment longer than before. It is internal, she says finally. But when the conversation keeps getting dragged back publicly, it stops being internal. It becomes something else. And that something else, Whoopi says, is the consequence of being a public figure. That line gets a strong reaction, one of the loudest so far. Miley nods again, but this time there's a slight shake of her head too. Being a public figure shouldn't mean being permanently defined by your worst moments, she says. Another wave of applause, louder, more divided. One of the co-hosts glances toward the producers off camera, then back at the table. You can tell they're aware of how intense this has become. Okay, she says carefully, we're going to take a quick breath here, because clearly this is hitting a nerve, not just here, but with everyone watching. A few nervous laughs from the audience. But the tension doesn't fully break. Miley adjusts slightly in her seat, looking down for a second before looking back up. Whoopi remains steady, composed, but firm. And as the cameras stay locked on the table, it's clear this conversation isn't winding down. If anything, it's about to go. Even deeper. The brief pause doesn't really reset anything. It just gives everyone a second to breathe before the conversation picks right back up where it left off. You can feel the shift immediately as the cameras settle again on the table at the view. The audience is quieter now, more cautious with their reactions, like they're aware that every response could tip the balance one way or the other. One of the co-hosts leans forward, her tone noticeably more careful than before. I think what we're circling around here is something bigger than just one moment or one person, she says. It's about how we handle public growth in real time. Miley Cyrus nods slightly. Exactly. But before the moment can soften, Whoopi Goldberg adds, but it's also about who gets the grace to grow and who doesn't. That line lands with a different kind of weight. There's a pause, and the audience reacts more thoughtfully this time. Less noise, more quiet murmurs. Miley looks at Whoopi, her expression tightening just a little. I agree with that, she says. I actually do. But I don't think taking away grace from one person fixes the lack of grace given to someone else. A few audience members clap at that. Measured, not overwhelming. Whoopi nods once, acknowledging the point. No, it doesn't, she says. But it does highlight the imbalance. And I'm not denying imbalance exists, Miley replies quickly. I'm saying I can't personally carry the weight of fixing all of it. The tension is still there, but now it's shifting into something more layered. Less sharp interruptions, more pointed statements. One of the co-hosts jumps in again, trying to keep things from escalating too fast. Let me ask this, because I think viewers at home are probably wondering the same thing. Do you feel like you're being asked to represent more than just yourself in these conversations? Miley doesn't hesitate this time. Yes. All the time. There's a small ripple of reaction from the audience. And that's part of the pressure, she continues. Because no matter what I say, it's not just taken as my perspective, it's taken as a statement about bigger issues, bigger communities. And that's a lot to carry in a single conversation. Whoopi responds, her tone steady but still firm. But that comes with the platform. And I accept that, Miley says. But accepting it doesn't mean I can always meet every expectation perfectly. Another co-host leans in. No one can. There's a brief moment where it feels like the table might finally find some common ground. But it doesn't last long. Whoopi shifts slightly in her seat. The concern, she says, is when people with platforms move through spaces, take from them, and then step away without fully understanding what they've taken. Miley exhales, this time more visibly. I hear that. I really do. But I think there's an assumption in that statement, that I didn't understand, or that I didn't try to understand. Did you? Whoopi asks directly. The question cuts through the room. Miley pauses. For the first time, there's a longer silence before she answers. I think I understood as much as I could at that time, she says. And I understand more now. And is that enough? Whoopi presses. There's a slight reaction, some audience members shifting, a few murmurs. Miley's tone changes again, not louder, but more grounded, more resolute. It has to be, she says. Because I can't go back and relive moments with the knowledge I have now. All I can do is move forward differently. One of the co-hosts nods, trying to support the balance. That's what growth is, right? But Whoopi doesn't fully concede. Growth also involves making peace with the fact that some people won't move forward with you. Miley nods slowly. And I've made peace with that. Have you? Whoopi asks. That lands sharper than anything in the last few minutes. The audience reacts, this time louder again, a mix of surprise and tension. Miley leans forward slightly now, matching the intensity. Yes, she says. I have. What I haven't made peace with is being told that no matter what I do, it will never be enough. There's a strong reaction, applause, a few people standing briefly before sitting back down. One of the co-hosts quickly gestures for calm. Okay, let's just, everyone take a breath. But the moment has already escalated. Whoopi keeps her composure, but her tone is firmer now. No one's saying it will never be enough. What we're saying is that enough isn't for you to decide. Miley shakes her head immediately. Then who decides it? The question hangs heavy. There's no quick answer. Even the co-hosts hesitate. Finally, Whoopi responds, slower this time. The people who were impacted. And what if those people don't all agree? Miley asks. Another pause. That's part of the reality, Whoopi says. Miley leans back slightly, letting out a breath that sounds like a mix of frustration and disbelief. So then it's an impossible standard, she says. A wave of applause breaks out, louder than before. One of the co-hosts looks out toward the audience, then back at the table. I think what's making this so intense is that both things are true, she says. There isn't a clean resolution here. That's exactly my point, Miley says, turning toward her. There isn't. So continuing to revisit it like there is one, it just keeps people stuck. Whoopi responds almost immediately. Or it keeps the conversation alive. And at what cost? Miley pushes back. Now the back and forth is coming faster again. At the cost of discomfort, Whoopi says. And who carries that cost? Miley asks. Everyone involved, Whoopi answers. Miley shakes her head. That's not how it feels. The audience reacts again, more divided than ever. Another co-host steps in, her voice slightly raised to regain control. Okay, we're getting into a space where this could go on for hours, and we actually have to be mindful of time. A few light laughs from the audience, but the tension is still very much there. She turns to Miley. Let me ask you something more personal, because I think this might help people understand where you're coming from. When you look back at those moments now, what do you feel? Miley pauses. This time, it's not defensive. It's reflective. I feel uncomfortable, she admits. I feel like I didn't have the awareness I wish I had. And I feel responsible for that. The audience quiets down again. It's one of the most vulnerable things she's said so far. But I also feel proud of who I've become since then, she adds. And I don't think those two things cancel each other out. There's a softer round of applause now, less reactive, more supportive. Whoopi nods slightly. That's fair. It's the first moment that feels like a small de-escalation. But even then, she adds, as long as both sides are acknowledged. They are, Miley says. By me. Another co-host quickly jumps in. sensing the moment could either stabilize or spiral again. And I think that's an important note to sit with. She glances toward the camera briefly, then back at the table. Because these conversations aren't easy, but they are necessary. The audience claps, more unified this time. But the energy hasn't fully settled. Miley sits back, her posture a mix of calm and tension. Whoopi remains composed, but still clearly engaged. And as the segment edges closer to its final stretch, it's clear that while the intensity may have softened slightly, the impact of what just unfolded is far from over. The conversation doesn't explode at the end, but it doesn't neatly resolve either. It lingers in that uncomfortable, very real space that live television sometimes falls into when neither side fully backs down. You can feel it as the table goes quiet again for a moment on The View. The audience, which had been reacting throughout, is now more restrained, watching closely, waiting to see how this ends. One of the co-hosts leans in with a measured tone, clearly aware they're approaching the final minutes. I think what just happened here is something a lot of people at home are probably relating to, she says. It's complicated, it's layered, and it doesn't always have a clean ending. Miley Cyrus nods, her expression calmer now, but still serious. Yeah, she says. And I think that's okay. Not everything needs to be wrapped up perfectly in one conversation. Whoopi Goldberg glances at her, then nods as well. That part's true, she says. But what matters is that the conversation keeps happening. There's a small round of applause, more subdued than earlier, but genuine. Miley looks toward Whoopi again, and for the first time since the tension really peaked, her tone softens in a more personal way. And I'm not against the conversation, she says. I just want it to feel like a conversation, not a conclusion that's already been decided. Whoopi considers that for a second. Fair enough, she replies. But conversations also come with tough questions. And I'm here for tough questions, Miley says. I just think there's a difference between asking and assuming. That line gets a noticeable reaction, some claps, a few thoughtful murmurs. One of the co-hosts quickly adds, and I think today showed that, because this wasn't easy, but it was honest. There's a bit of shared laughter at the table, light but slightly tense, like everyone is aware of what just happened. Another host turns toward Miley. Before we wrap, is there anything you want people watching to take away from this? Especially those who might still feel conflicted. Miley pauses, thinking. I'd say allow people to grow, she says finally. And also allow yourself to feel whatever you feel about that growth. Both things can exist. But at some point, we have to decide if we're moving forward or just staying in the same place. The audience responds with steady applause, one of the more unified reactions of the segment. Whoopi nods again, this time a little more openly. And I'd say, she adds, don't be afraid to keep asking questions, even when the answers aren't comfortable. Another round of applause follows, slightly louder. There's a sense now that both sides have said what they needed to say, even if they didn't fully agree. The co-host in the center smiles toward the camera. And that's why we have these conversations here, she says. Because they matter. The audience claps again as the segment begins to wind down. Miley Cyrus, thank you for being here, and for being open with us, she adds. Thank you for having me, Miley replies, offering a small smile. There's a brief moment where Miley and Whoopi Goldberg make eye contact again. It's not tense, but it's not fully resolved either. It's the kind of look that says we disagreed, but we showed up for the conversation. The cameras pull back slightly as the audience continues applauding, and the show transitions toward a commercial break. But what happened at that table doesn't stay in the studio. Within minutes of the segment airing, clips start circulating online. Short excerpts, some only a few seconds long, begin appearing across platforms. The moment where Miley says, "At what point does it stop being accountability and start being punishment?" gets shared rapidly. So does Whoopi's response about impact not having an expiration date. On Twitter, reactions are immediate and divided. Some users praise Miley for standing her ground. Others side with Whoopi, saying the questions needed to be asked. A few posts start trending, debating whether the conversation was fair or whether it crossed a line. On Instagram, fan accounts begin posting clips with captions like, "Miley handled that with grace," and "This got uncomfortable fast." Comment sections fill up quickly. Thousands of responses, many going back and forth, echoing the exact tension that played out on the show. Over on YouTube, full clips of the segment are uploaded within hours. Titles vary, some framing it as a powerful discussion, others calling it a heated clash. The views climb fast. Media outlets begin picking it up too. Articles analyzing the exchange, breaking down key moments, and asking the same question viewers are now debating. Was this accountability, or was it something else? Backstage, according to reports that start surfacing later, the atmosphere remains professional, but quiet. There's no dramatic confrontation. No shouting. Just a noticeable shift in energy. Miley reportedly thanks the production team, exchanges a few brief words with the hosts, and then heads out. Whoopi stays behind a bit longer, speaking with producers and the rest of the panel. No public statements are made immediately after. But the moment has already taken on a life of its own. By the end of the day, the segment has reached millions. Clips continue circulating. Debates continue unfolding. And the conversation that started at one table on The View has expanded far beyond it. Because it wasn't just about one person. It was about something bigger. Something audiences are still trying to figure out in real time. So what do you think? Was Miley Cyrus right to push back the way she did? Or did Whoopi Goldberg raise questions that needed to be asked? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Talk Show. Fall out for more real talk show stories.